The mountains wake before the sun. A hush drapes over the ridges, broken only by the slow sigh of pines leaning into the wind. The air tastes of stone and ash and pine needles crushed under deer hooves. Far below, rivers cut through the earth like silver threads, sewing the land together. But up here, in the high country where men rarely wander, silence is king. Silence, and those who learn to live with it. Among them was a man whose name the mountains kept for themselves. A man rough of beard, wide of shoulder, eyes weathered in his squinting slits from too much staring at horizons. He lived alone, or rather, he lived with the company of things that do not speak. Fire, snow, stars. His life had hardened him like the bark of an old cedar tree, wrinkled with storms, scarred by lightning, but still standing. At dawn, he crouched near his campfire, coaxing flame from the last of the embers. His hands were cracked like dry riverbeds, his nails chipped from stone and rope. Every movement carried the heaviness of someone who had learned patience the hard way. He brewed coffee black as river mud, drank it from a tin cup with the slowness of ritual, staring at nothing and everything at once. For years he had walked these ridges, chasing no one's trail but his own. He had once known the bustle of towns, laughter spilling from saloons, the clatter of dice, the false warmth of companions whose loyalty lasted no longer than the next drink. He had once thought himself part of that world. But a man does not belong where his heart is mocked for its silence, where gentleness is mistaken for weakness, where grief is unwelcome at the table. And so he had left behind faces that turned away when his voice trembled, left behind the ache of a love who saw in him only the roughness and none of the steadying strength, left behind the last traces of a family who thought him too wild to trust, too restless to keep. The mountains did not ask him to explain. The trees did not laugh at his solitude. He became theirs and they his. That morning, with the mist curling low, he heard it, the sound that did not belong. A rhythm of hooves pounding the earth, frantic and alive. He stood, hand on the rifle slung by habit, eyes narrowing into the fog. Out from between the pines it came, a stallion, black as a thundercloud, mane flying like torn banners in the wind. Its breath steamed in the cold. Its muscles rolled beneath its hide like rivers in flood. The mountain man knew horses. He had broken many in younger days, for ranchers who saw them only as labor. But this creature was different. This one carried fire in its blood. It looked at him not with fear, but with fury, the kind of fury that belongs only to the wild. Something in the man stirred. He dropped his rifle and reached for rope instead. Not to kill, not to harm, but to test his own strength against the freedom burning in that animal's eyes. He moved slowly, rope sliding through calloused fingers, step by cautious step. The stallion reared, screaming into the valley, hooves pawing the sky. Then it bolted. The man lunged, rope whistling as it looped through the air. He caught the neck, felt the violent jerk almost tear his shoulder from its socket. The stallion screamed again, dragged him across the ground. Dirt tore his skin, rocks bruised bone, but he held on, teeth clenched, eyes wild to match the beast's own. Through brush and bramble, through streams cold as glacier melt, the Mustang pulled him. His boots slipped, his body slammed against roots and stone, but still he would not let go. It was no longer about taming. It was about being taken, about seeing where the wildness led. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. His breath was fire in his lungs. His arms screamed with strain. Yet he clung on, half crawling, half dragged, until at last the stallion broke through a wall of thick pines and stumbled into a place that made the man freeze, rope slack in his hands. He had been pulled into another world, a valley hidden from the maps of men, cradled deep between ridges no one dared cross. The air itself felt different, thicker with life, sweeter on the tongue. Wildflowers painted the meadows like spilled paint. A stream wound through it like a ribbon of glass, scattering light into 1,000 shards. Strange birds, colors too bright for this harsh land, flickered between branches. It was as though the earth had kept a secret garden for itself, untouched by axe or plow. The stallion finally slowed, chest heaving, nostrils flaring. It tossed its head, rope hanging loose, and then it stopped fighting. It stood proud and still, as though daring the man to see what it had revealed. He dropped to his knees in the grass, breath ragged, hands bleeding. Pain screamed through every inch of him, yet he felt none of it. For the first time in years, he felt something else, wonder. It was as though the mountains themselves had dragged him here through the strength of that animal. As though some force larger than his own broken choices had decided to show him what lay hidden beyond solitude. The man looked around that valley, heart pounding slower now, steadier. Something stirred in him, something long buried, hope fragile as a new flame. He did not yet know what waited there, nor how it would change him. But deep in his bones, he felt it. His life had just shifted, and the mountains, silent as ever, seemed to nod in agreement. The valley was not empty. A place that alive could not be empty. The man sensed it long before he saw the first sign. A thin column of smoke rose in the distance, straight as a prayer into the pale sky. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant hands. Hands meant someone had claimed this hidden place as their own. Caution weighed on him. Men who stumbled upon strangers in the wilderness rarely found friendship waiting. Yet something about the valley's hush told him this was no outlaw's den, no hunter's camp. It felt older, quieter, a place someone lived not to conquer, but to endure. He followed the smoke. His body ached with every step, clothes torn from the Mustang's drag, skin raw from stone and thorn. Yet his spirit felt light, as though carried forward by more than muscle. The stallion had vanished into the tree-line, leaving him alone. Alone, but not abandoned. The cabin appeared as if grown from the earth itself. Logs stacked with a care that spoke of years, moss feathering the roof, a small garden fenced by willow branches. Beside the cabin, a stream bent low, its water lifting in tiny silver arcs where fish broke the surface. It was simple, quiet hole, a place built not for show, but survival. And then she stepped out, the woman. She carried a bucket in one hand, her hair falling loose in strands touched by sunlight, her figure straight, yet softened by weariness. She was neither young nor old, but timeless, like the land itself, marked by storms yet still blooming. Her dress was patched, boots worn, but her eyes were sharp as flint, steady as the stars. She saw him instantly. No gasp, no scream. Just a stillness, like a deer measuring whether to flee or fight. He stopped where he stood, letting the silence stretch between them. At last she spoke, her voice low, roughened by solitude. "You look as though the mountain chewed you up and spit you out." He almost smiled. Almost. Something in her gaze told him she did not expect an answer, and he gave none. Words felt too heavy to break that moment. She set down the bucket, wiped her hands on her dress, and motioned toward the cabin. "If you plan on bleeding, best not to do it in the dirt." He followed, slow, careful. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and bread left cooling on the hearth. The room was neat, but not delicate. Tools hung where they were needed, blankets folded for warmth, not beauty. She led him to a chair carved from pine and gestured for him to sit. The man obeyed. He had spent years avoiding company, yet here he was, trusting a stranger with his wounds. She cleaned his cuts with a gentleness that surprised him. Her hands were sure practiced. He wondered how many times she had stitched her own skin, mended herself with no one else around. She asked no questions at first. Silence was her language, and he respected it. Only when his breathing eased did she finally speak again. "What were you chasing?" He looked at her, considering. The truth felt too strange to say, that he had been dragged into this valley by a horse wild as fire. But he saw no mockery in her expression, no impatience. Only curiosity edged with wariness. "A Mustang," he said at last. "Black as night. Let me hear." Her hands stilled for a moment, then resumed. "The black one," she murmured. "I've seen him on the ridges. Comes and goes like a shadow. Most men who try to rope him never return." He did not answer. She tied the last knot in the bandage and pulled back, studying him with eyes that missed little. "You're lucky," she said. "Lucky and stubborn." The man almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. He realized he had not laughed in years. For a while, they said nothing more. He watched her move about the cabin, stirring the fire, pouring water, breaking bread into pieces. She lived with a rhythm born of solitude, each task deliberate, each movement necessary. She handed him food without ceremony, as though feeding a stranger in her home was as ordinary as feeding herself. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "You live here alone." She did not look at him. "I live here with the land. Alone is what folks in towns call it." Her tone carried no self-pity, only truth. Yet beneath it, he heard something else, an old wound, faint but unhealed. She told him little, but enough. Enough for him to see the shape of her life. She had once been part of a town beyond the ridges, a life built with another. A man who loved her when days were easy and warm, but who turned cold when storms came. He left when the crops failed, when sickness struck, when survival required more than charm. She did not tell the story with bitterness. She told it like a fact, like the changing of seasons. She had been underestimated, discarded, yet she had chosen to endure. She had built her cabin, planted her garden, carved out her own sanctuary in the valley the world had forgotten. The mountain man listened in silence. He felt the echo of his own story in hers. Different paths, same loneliness. Two lives shaped by rejection, made strong by necessity, yet softened by the ache of being unseen. As night settled, he sat by the fire while she worked at a table, mending clothes by lamplight. The quiet between them was not empty. It was full of unspoken recognition, of two souls who had lived too long in solitude, finding in each other a reflection. When at last he lay on a blanket near the hearth, he stared at the ceiling beams, listening to the stream's lull outside, and thought of the Mustang. That wild, unbroken creature had dragged him here, into the hands of a woman who carried her own untamed spirit. The valley was no accident. It was a threshold, and he had only just stepped through. The days passed like rivers, unhurried yet unstoppable. In the valley, time moved differently. The mountain man found himself waking to the sound of water singing over stone, the scent of wood smoke curling soft against the dawn, the sight of her bent over her garden, hands buried in earth that had become her companion. He did not speak much, neither did she, yet silence between them was no longer heavy. It was a bridge, a space where understanding could flow without words. He helped where he could. At first it was small things, bringing in firewood, hauling water from the stream, mending a fence broken by wind. She watched him with guarded eyes, half expecting him to leave as others had. But when he stayed, when he moved with quiet patience instead of demand, something in her softened. They worked side by side, and in the rhythm of labor, they found an ease that conversation could not grant. She showed him where wild herbs grew along the ridge, how to grind them into medicine. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits, how to cut wood so it burned longer. They learned each other not through stories, but through hands, through the way each task revealed patience or strength or care. One evening, he carved a piece of pine with his knife, shaping it into the figure of a bird. He handed it to her without words, as though the gesture itself was enough. She held it, thumb brushing over the rough edges, and for a moment her eyes glistened with something unspoken. She sat on the mantel beside the fire. She did not thank him, not aloud, but her silence was a kind of gratitude deeper than speech. At night, when storms swept across the ridges, they sat together inside the cabin. The wind rattled the shutters, the rain beat against the roof, yet within those walls there was a steadiness, a warmth. She would hum, low, almost to herself, old songs she remembered from childhood, songs of harvest and hearth. The mountain man would sit close to the fire, listening as though her voice was the only sound in the world. Trust came slowly like spring thaw. One night, as the storm howled fiercest, she spoke more than she had in all their days together. "I thought I'd grow old here alone," she said, eyes on the flames. "That no one would ever see me again? Not truly." Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with release. He turned to her. His face was rough, lined with years of solitude, but his gaze was steady. "I thought the same," he said softly. Their words hung in the air, fragile as moth wings. She did not look at him, yet she reached for the kettle, poured 2 cups of tea, handed him one. Their fingers brushed. For both, it was enough. The Mustang appeared often at the edges of the valley, a shadow watching from the trees. It never came close, never let itself be touched, but it lingered, like a guardian or a reminder of what wildness could not be tamed. The man would glance at it and feel something stir, as if the horse itself was measuring him, deciding whether he was worthy of the place he had stumbled into. Her story unraveled piece by piece, never in a rush. She told him of the man who had once promised her a life of love, but fled when hardship came. She told it without bitterness, but he saw the wound it had left, saw how it made her wary of giving trust again. He listened, and in her story he heard his own. He too had been rejected, by family, by those who thought him too untamed, too heavy with silence to belong. He shared little of his pain, but enough for her to know it was real. And in the quiet between their truths, they saw one another, not as broken, but as enduring. The bond grew not in sudden passion, but in steady warmth. The way he split logs without being asked, the way she left an extra piece of bread at his place by the fire, the way their laughter, rare at first, came more easily, light as rain after drought. One night, the storm pressed hardest. The cabin shuddered as lightning split the sky, thunder rolling over the valley. She trembled, not of fear of weather, but of memory, of loneliness returning. He saw it. Without thinking, he moved closer. For a moment, they sat side by side, the firelight painting shadows across their faces. She did not pull away when his hand brushed hers. She did not speak when he placed his calloused palm over her fingers. Instead, she let the silence speak for her. That night, walls cracked open, not in grand confessions but in small admissions. "I'm tired of being unseen," she whispered. His answer was quiet, certain. "I see you." Her breath hitched, not because of the words themselves, but because she knew he meant them. In all her years of carrying herself, of surviving alone, no one had ever said it with such stillness, such truth. And so, in the middle of the storm, 2 lives once scattered by pain began to weave together. Not with fire that burns quickly, but with embers that glow long into the night. The Mustang cried out from the ridge, a wild, echoing call that pierced through thunder. And in its voice, they both felt it, the reminder that wildness and belonging could live side by side. For the first time in many years, the mountain man laid down by the fire and did not feel the weight of exile pressing on his chest. Instead, he felt the warmth of something new, something he dared not name yet. A beginning. Summer ripened in the valley. The days stretched long and golden, the air sweet with the hum of bees and the rustle of tall grass. The mountain man had almost forgotten what it was to count time. He woke with her beside the hearth, worked the land with her under the sun, and rested at night with the sound of the stream carrying him into dreams. Yet peace is fragile, like a wildflower growing in stone. Sooner or later, footsteps find it. It began with the echo of gunfire on the ridge. Faint but wrong. The valley was a place of songbirds, not rifles. The man froze where he stood, axe still in his hand, listening. A second shot followed, closer. Then voices. He and the woman exchanged a glance, and in her eyes he saw fear, not of the mountains, not of storms, but of men. By sundown, they arrived. 3 strangers, ragged from the trail, yet greedy in their gaze. Hunters, maybe, or drifters who had lost their way. But when their eyes swept the valley, their hunger was clear. This was no accidental crossing. This was discovery. One of them, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, spoke first. "Pretty place you've got here. Shame to keep it all to yourselves." The woman stood tall in her doorway, shoulders squared, her voice even. "This valley belongs to no one." The man with the scar laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Then it belongs to whoever takes it." The mountain man stepped forward. He did not raise his rifle, did not bear steel. He simply stood, steady as a stone. His silence carried more weight than threat. For a moment, the strangers hesitated, measuring him. But greed has a way of deafening men to warnings. That night, tension crackled like lightning before a storm. The strangers set camp on the edge of the meadow, their fire burning too bright, their laughter too loud. The woman watched from the cabin window, hands clenched. "They won't leave," she whispered. "Not until they've broken this place." The mountain man said nothing, but his jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the ridge where a familiar shadow moved. The Mustang stood there, black against the moonlight, watching. When dawn broke, the intruders made their move. They tried to rope the stallion first, thinking it the prize of the valley. But the Mustang was not theirs to take. It screamed, reared, and tore through their lines, dragging one man across the ground before vanishing into the trees. Its cries split the valley, wild and unbroken, shaking even the mountain man's bones. The strangers cursed, regrouped, turned their eyes to the cabin. "If we can't have the horse, we'll take the land," the scarred man spat. What followed was not a battle of guns and blades, but of wills. The mountain man stepped between them and the cabin. He said few words, only that they would not pass. His voice was low, steady, like thunder rolling far off, yet promising rain. The woman stood behind him, her presence aflame at his back. She did not hide. She did not tremble. Together, they were unmovable. The intruders sneered, tried to push past, but the valley itself seemed to rise against them. The stallion appeared again, charging from the trees, scattering their horses. The stream swelled sudden from the night's rain, cutting off their path. Every force of nature turned cold against them, as if the land itself had chosen its guardians. By dusk, the strangers were gone, driven not by bullets, but by the weight of something they could not name. A power older than greed, a wildness that refused to be broken. Silence returned. The valley exhaled. The woman leaned against the cabin wall, shoulders sagging, tears bright in her eyes. Not of fear, of release. "We kept it," she whispered. The mountain man looked at her, and for the first time in years, he smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "No," he said softly, "it kept us." That night, as the fire burned low, they sat close, hands entwined. Outside, the Mustang grazed at the meadow's edge, its black coat gleaming under starlight. No rope bound it, no man claimed it. Yet it lingered, free and near, as though it too had chosen to stay. The mountain man closed his eyes and felt it in his bones. He had not been dragged here by chance. He had been brought home. And so, listeners of the wide world, remember this. Sometimes fate does not call softly. Sometimes it drags us, through pain, through struggle, through storms we would never choose. And yet, beyond the breaking, we find valleys we never dreamed of. Places of healing, hearts that see us, homes that hold us, not with walls but with love. If you have wandered long and grown weary, know this, there are still valleys waiting. And perhaps, one day, you too will be dragged into wonder by something wild and untamed. If this story touched your heart, leave a mark, like, share, and subscribe so the fire of these Wild West tales may keep burning. Tell us, friends, from where in this wide world you're listening.